Welcome back to WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. In an effort to continue to entertain, engage, and mostly inform folks, we're going to have a lot of our sponsors on, a lot of our friends who've had their businesses shuttered and doing curbside, and I'm going to be doing new ads all week, so make sure you're tuning us in, checking us out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm checking in with sort of just everyone in my life and taking the temperature. Marty Conway is a recurring character on this Howard Stern-y kind of programming here at WNST throughout the years. And for those of you who don't know Marty was very involved with the Baltimore Orioles back in the 1980s and early 90s in getting Camden Yards underway and selling sponsorships. He's worked in Major League Baseball, in the Texas Rangers, in the Bush family, and is now the good professor at Georgetown University. And I would say you have no class right now, but perhaps it's moved online, Marty. I'm not sure. What's going on, man?
It absolutely has moved online. So as they call that, the continuity of operations approach. So, yeah.
So if I Rodney
exactly
Dangerfield you and said you had no class, that would be inaccurate, correct?
Not at the moment. We're intending to hold everything online for the rest of the semester.
All right. Well, where to go with all of this? I mean, let's start with the fact that the NFL is doing business as usual, right? And I thought that was okay on Sunday. As I woke up on Monday and got into Tuesday and certainly into it, it'll go away soon, right? Because it just will. But the optics of it, probably not the greatest. But the NFL and the Players Association, they want their money. All right. I don't think it's the best plan for them, and they're going to be fine. So we don't have to even talk about the NFL. I think they're going to be okay as long as we don't have absolute chaos and we have 4 million people dead by the 4th of July, right? So if that doesn't happen, the NFL goes on. But all the rest of it, oh my God, Marty. I mean, for the business of sports, for the business of entertainment, I remember a week ago I was pissed when Pearl Jam got canceled, right? Now look at it, right?
It's the big reset. 10 years ago we had the big recession. This is the big reset. This will be the big reset for sports because coming out of this, however it comes out in May and June and July, everything has changed. What was going to be held in the spring is presumably going to be held in the fall. Sports that may not come back, leagues like the XFL certainly will unlikely come back, and maybe they won't come back next year. So it's going to be the big reset. And yes, the remarkable irony is that the NFL not only survives but will thrive in this environment, and the NFL tends to really, I think, at the top levels, care not about what is the right thing to do, because they continue on. As I said to a friend in an article the other day, this is an amazing consequence here because it's like here comes this huge asteroid towards the sports industry around the world, not just in the U.S., around the world. And you would think that it would hit and impact the biggest of the sports the most. It's like the asteroid was headed for New York City, and it hit Schenectady. It's going to leave the NFL not only unscathed, but probably in better position coming out of this because their new media deals will start to transpire middle of this year, late this year. And by September, August, September, when they're, getting back into full swing, people will be desperate for this live sports again, the live events, and they're likely to have one of their best years. So it just, things tend to work in these most unique ways. And, they and some other industries appear to be well positioned despite, this huge dislocation, this big reset that's going to go on.
Marty, just start with baseball. I mean, just because it affects Baltimore so much, right? And it was so bad to begin with, and you and I sit here and talk about how bad it is, and nobody was going, and I don't want to say that they've done the Orioles a favor shuttering, the season. That certainly, it hasn't done my neighborhood any favors or the hotels or the restaurants, and Lord knows who's going to survive this and who isn't, and we're going to muscle up with our Baltimore positive energy here and try to keep as many of them as alive as we can in the coming weeks because this feels like it's going to be protracted. But this is baseball getting kicked in the nuts when it was already down. I've talked to people, maybe it's okay that they're not playing March 26th the way they thought they were going to. It was already in trouble. Maybe it comes back the 4th of July and America falls in love with baseball again, wink, wink, like it did in 98 or like it did in 95 when it came back. I don't know. I don't know the temperature for it. I know the cool part about baseball is it's played outdoors, and I think people will be more inclined to go outdoors in June and July, right, than indoors or where people are going to be allowed to go with fresh air when all of this is over with and safe as our government deems it to be. But baseball will be the first one to sort of come back, I think, because hockey and basketball are played inside. And I think baseball has some real challenges here, and the hardest part for baseball is it's going to take even longer to ramp up because of pitchers. I'm really worried about what happens and fascinated to see what happens with baseball.
Well, baseball is a $10 to $12 billion industry at the current time, and the impact of what you're talking about is real. It's certainly going to happen, but baseball is also distributed over 27, 28 cities and, basically markets. And each of those are going to respond, I think, differently. I think you're going to have no problems in New York and Los Angeles and some places. But then again, teams like the Texas Rangers were on the verge of opening a new stadium. There's just various developments. Seattle Mariners maybe hit, the hardest based on what cities and communities have been hit the hardest by this. And so the bounce back, such as it is, will be, felt differently. I think, yes, here locally, if you're talking about them holding 65 or 70 home games rather than 81.
I think that's optimistic, by the way.
Yeah, and maybe it's 50 or 60 home games. We'll see what it is. And so, now what happens again, because all of these major sports, and I'm going to separate here for you, I'm going to separate the NFL, Major League Baseball, and NBA from the rest of the sports. And that's because they have such strong media relationships, new media relationships, and strong financial relationships. They're going to survive better than an organization, an industry like the National Hockey League, where almost 40% of the team's revenue and the league's revenue comes from live events and ticket sales and gate receipts. And so,
the same would be said for like minor league baseball, right? I mean,
yeah.
I haven't even pondered golf and NASCAR and the international sports and things where they bring the circus to town for the week. Dare I say, the traveling shows, right?
Yeah, what we call in sports the sports circuits, the ones that the tennis, the golf, the Formula One that go around the world. Those are going to be hit because those dates are lost. You can't really necessarily, fit a 32, tennis schedule into 20 weeks, whatever they have left. The more vulnerable of the sports in those communities, minor league baseball is a good example. They're going to, and I think Major League Baseball is going to have to step forward here. Look, they were in the midst of a very rough negotiation over the contraction of teams and a new formula that was to, brought forth in Houston that we can do this differently in our local camps. I think that all ends now because I think the reality is baseball, Major League Baseball, needs minor league baseball. They need it to survive. And so this notion that we were going to contract...
Do they understand that or really?
Well, again, I think...
Do the bean counters understand that? You know what I'm saying?
Well, keep in mind, this was part of a business negotiation over a longer term. This happens about every 5 years with their player negotiation agreements between MLB and Major League and minor league baseball. So let's be careful to not construe what was said in the media as what they actually want to do because this was a negotiation. But as I said just a couple of minutes ago, I think that's all off. I think Major League Baseball now takes a kid glove approach to all baseball, from minor league baseball to college baseball to little league baseball, because they know that they need this in the communities when it comes back this summer, and they need it to bounce back completely and not be impaired, such as a way that it really hurts the sport.
Marty Conway is here. He's the good professor at Georgetown University and doing all things sports business and consulting and trying to console me during the shutdown here of sports and the shutdown. On to the bigger picture of all of this and, the ticket takers and the vendors and the people that were mixed up in this with March Madness this week, right? You're on a college campus. College is wiped out. Coaches, seasons lost, lacrosse players, baseball. Just go through the list. Softball, all of this, the College World Series, all of that. What does it mean for colleges, Marty, and their money and their pipeline and these kids who have all been sent home to watch guys like you on video teach them?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because what's happening at Georgetown, for example, is we were on spring break until currently, and so they've essentially told people we've closed the campus in 2 weeks. So you come back from spring break. They wanted students to go back to their permanent residences. So they're going to end up having to prorate people's dorm in half a semester. Tuition, not so much because they're going to continue to offer the classes online. But the NCAA is going to be in a position where they're going to have to grant those spring season athletes, if they want an additional season, a redshirt season, and they'll have to allow universities to expand rosters next year to take into account some of those seniors who wanted to come back and play again. And this raises questions about the Major League Baseball draft and other things that involve from the spring sports, let alone the Olympics, and we can talk about that now or another time. I
haven't thought about the Olympics, right? So the Olympics are going to get banged too, right?
Well, I think what's mounting here is, look, I think Tokyo is going to be in a position physically and structure-wise to do it. The question that we're running into right now is all the things that lead up to hosting the Olympics, all of the qualification events, all of the preparation, getting athletes in, making sure they're clean in this regard in terms of, quarantine and all that. I think it's going to start to bump up against the reality of, can you hold it in July, or can you hold it later this year potentially, or do you have to kick the can down the road to next summer and you end up having a 2021 Summer Olympics, just like they're about to have with the European Football Championships in Europe? They're going to kick that to 2021 because these major events, the preparation that it takes is months and months and months to do that. So I think we may find come June that it looks reasonably better in the population. But by that point, when do you qualify all these track and field athletes and everybody else that has to do it? So these are all things that complicate the process. But ultimately, back to the college question, I think you're going to see more athletes back in school next year. Financially, look, they're going to collect the tuition. They may have to give people some credits on room and board, but most of these universities are well enough in their endowment to be able to sustain, an interruption, a discontinuation like this.
Marty, I guess for all of these places, the revenue that comes in, from universities, for buildings, the Royal Farms Arena as an example, or just any of these revenue, all of the money's gone and making it up. The thoughts about the undertow of this and what this means for literally shuttering sports franchises or a minor league team that just can't sustain. Do you think that we're going to see that 90 days from now, that 90 days out, some of the franchises were less solvent than we thought they were? And I guess the NFL won't be affected at all, but I'm worried about, the Oakland A's, the Tampa Rays. Is there enough money there to sustain all of that stuff and people making calls on money from boards and whatnot? Because there's going to be no revenue coming in, right? In a lot of places that I hadn't thought about the Olympics till 5 minutes ago when you brought it up. And I was in Tokyo seeing all the Olympic stuff. It just didn't occur to me what happens there. I just, much like everything else, I'm like, it's just going to get banged, like the Stones tour, just going to get banged. You know what I mean? Like, I'm assuming most things aren't happening before the 4th of July. My assumption right now, just based on the first 48 hours of this mess.
Yeah. Look, I think you made a good, the phrase you used there, the undertow, is a good application for this, because Warren Buffett talks about the fact that in financial land and in the world of finance, what happens in the recession is, that low tide, and you start to see who's really exposed and not. Now, again, I think the financial strength of Major League Baseball at the central fund level, the money that they collect from national TV revenues, and they store that away into the millions, if not billions of dollars, will be able to sustain any owner who has a shortfall. And again,
now players are getting paid, right? Like literally, right? Like Chris Davis is getting his $2 million weekly check beginning this week, like sort of, kind of, right?
Well, I mean, again, we did see this in the case of a strike. Some of us I've lived through this twice in Major League Baseball, and so we know sort of what happens, that there are accommodations reached, whether the owners think they have to pay or they pay partially or to do it. What I've sort of determined is we've gone through this now for over 2 decades with various strikes and lockouts and interruptions. And the first level that we were concerned about sort of was, are the players getting paid? What happens to the continuity? And then we front office people, what was happening with them. For this dislocation in sports, and I do think it's similar in regard to a strike or lockout, even though it won't, ruin the season, we're seeing what you talked about is the rank and file folks who work, and literally talking about hundreds and sometimes thousands of people that it takes to put on not only one event, a baseball game or hockey game or et cetera, or the Preakness or Kentucky Derby. We're going to see the emphasis on that this time around. And you're starting to see, now that these sports teams and leagues have gotten themselves into the billions of dollars, literally in terms of value, the focus for them is now properly put on by the public is to say, what are you doing for the contingency folks, the contract workers who make these events go? And I think many of them are being forced. Some of them are doing it willfully, but I think Mark Cuban got out ahead of this and said, we're going to pay these people through the end of whatever regular season that was supposed to be. And I think that is one good thing that will come out of this, which is we know where the players stand, we know where the front office executives stand, and now going forward, we're going to know that the thousands of people that have to work to put on these events are going to get paid. They're going to get an opportunity maybe for health care support or other types of things if it's done properly. And I think this is going to force owners and operators of events to get out in front of this and to let people know you're going to be safe here when we come back, and we're going to make sure that you're as much as possible kept whole.
Marty Conway joining us here. He is the good professor at Georgetown University. You can follow him out on LinkedIn, follow him out on Twitter for all sorts of sports, business news. Things are not going to be normal here for a while, right? All the conversations we usually have about what the Orioles are doing and what Christmas night in July looks like and what opening day looks like and what the March Madness brackets look like and how the Stanley Cup playoffs. This is just a complete sports washout. One of the things, and I talked to Chris Pike about this, that, how many people it takes to put on a game. He was in Frisco, Texas when they didn't let the fans in last week for the Conference USA tournament, just talking about how many people are in the building. Just, you're a referee and people that put television on and people that hold the cameras and the broadcasters and the people that work the lights and the people that mop the floors and just stuff that has nothing to do with even serving fans, just literally, as you pointed out, functional parts of events and making these things go. Look at what's happened to the Preakness here, right? We've gone from let's save the Preakness to the Derby just saying, we're moving to September. I don't know what that does to the Maryland Jockey Club and Sal Sinatra when that happens, but it means there's no Preakness, right? There's been no announcement on that, so that's going to get banged. That's a Baltimore thing. All of the ancillary damage down the line, the undertow as I called it, after the tsunami hits, we're just talking about tons and tons. The lacrosse Final Four banged, right? That's 2 years worth of work going into that, over with. And so many of these things, as the events come up, as the dates come up, as this Thursday comes up, we know we would all been sitting around with greasy fingers and beer and half-filled brackets and all of that stuff. All of that on a daily basis is going to sort of come flooding back to us. This is going to be a tough psychological thing, I think, for folks to find the thing that they love that's not sports or concerts or whatever the normal things of life that's been taken away from them, right? And how you explain this to your kids.
Well, I think there are 2 points to make regarding that. The first is that, remember, just a short while ago, maybe a week ago or so, there was much discussion about holding these events, no matter what, talk about motor racing, basketball, et cetera, without fans. Remember, that was for a week or so we're planning a contingency plan to hold these events without fans. And then literally an NBA player tests positive and everything changes, right? That's in this country. It happened in soccer and over in Europe
You
as
sure
well.
it wasn't Tom Hanks?
Yeah, and so it took that for the league representatives and leaders to say, okay, that idea that we were talking about of holding events without fans, that was really a bad idea, right? Because we know in our hearts we can't do it without fans. It would, it's like becoming a studio television show, of which that was what was happening to sports, literally, because they were putting so much premium on the media component that they were literally thinking, okay, we can hold these events, show them on TNT and ESPN without fans. And I think the reality of that now, this for once sets in stone the idea that you can't do this without your fan base, regardless, right? Regardless of how much it takes to get them in, how much you have to promote, all these different things, you have got to have a fan base for two reasons. Number one, because it's the lifeblood. And number two, you can't hold respectable events without fans. That's number one. And I think the second thing that we come out is we're going to see a
Did you tell the Orioles that during
the
yeah.
We're going
The Orioles tried it once. We're still talking about it. That's how stupid it was, right?
At some point, we're going to see a rush back. The events are going to open. Fans are going to show up. And you're going to see teams and leagues and owners and others, again, start to understand and express their appreciation for the fans. So it won't be Fan Appreciation Day once a year anymore, or Fan Appreciation Weekend, or talking about fan engagement. Their focus will necessarily flip from what's the biggest media deal that I can do, which is important, to what's the biggest thing I can do to entertain and encourage fans to be in the stands. Not free, not just bring your kids in, whatever, but a full-on approach to say, if we don't have fans and we don't have an audience, and we don't have spectators, and we don't have legitimate followers, then we really are esports, and we don't want to be that.
By the way, you just said something. I thought maybe this is when the nerds take over. We're all trapped in the house, and I'm going to watch Joey from Daytona Beach take on Lily from Cheyenne, Wyoming in their nerd fest. Ted Leonsis is betting $1 billion that we're all going to sit around and, do this. I have no interest in that. I still have yet to read Hemingway. I haven't even read your latest blog. You know what I mean? So I got things to do around here so I can learn.
Well, I think it's interesting because you say that, because you and I might not, but I want to give you two instances that might tell you a little bit about what happens going forward. The Phoenix Suns decided that they were going to play out their season, so to speak, and I put that in my air quotes, in their NBA 2K team against the rest. So they were playing their schedule, and they started last week, and I don't remember who their opponent was, but I guess it was the Dallas Mavericks. They're going to play that schedule out on their NBA 2K. Well, they had, and get ready for it, on an average of about 4,000 to 5,000 consistent viewers, and it peaked at one time at 14,000, right? So they had that. The second thing is, in Spain the other day, there was one of their classic derbies between two local teams. A player from each side decided to join and play in their version of their electronic game, and they had 60,000 people tune in to watch that. And so what I was going to tell you at the very beginning.
By the way, I think those are Russian bots. You know what I mean? You will never convince me that.
It might be, but a couple of the winners that are coming out of this, in addition to the NFL, is a clear winner, if there is such a thing, is Twitch. And I think you're going to see Twitch as a TV, sort of as a viewing network, now start to, and I say this with all due respect, I think you're going to see going forward in the future, maybe not in the NFL, but in some of the other bigger global sports, the day of a game, the day of a big rivalry game, you're going to see participants in that game who are 23, 24-year-old soccer players, basketball players, join an E-League in the morning and play in front of 5, 10, 15,000 people, on Twitch, and then come play the game in the afternoon, because literally that's what they do. They get up in the morning and they play electronic games, and then they go to the arena or they go to the stadium and they play. And that's the reality of the new athlete. And I think that is going to be an interesting trend going forward. Back to my point as a fan engagement point, because no longer Is it just going to be about Little League Baseball, getting people on board for baseball or sports? It's going to be about the electronic gaming piece, because more kids pick up FIFA today and play than they do to pick up a soccer ball and go play outside with it. And so I think this might be something else when we see who are some of these winners that come out of this. I think the NFL is one. I think ESPN is one, because they're going to continue to collect revenues even though there's no sports. And I think a couple of others along the way, we're going to see them emerge as they've had their opportunity now, and maybe the strong get stronger and a couple of emergents come onto the scene like Twitch.
My dude, Marty Conway, is on LinkedIn. He is on Twitter. He is sequestered. He is teaching remotely from somewhere between Baltimore and Washington. You can find him out on Twitter and say hello. And you've been very active. We're all shut in, right? Like social media itself is going to be the big winner, right? Like we're all going to do a lot of talking, hopefully a lot of listening. Hopefully there's going to be some learning involved. We're all going to come out of this 90 days later different people if we survive, right? Like this, to borrow Red Fox, this is the big one.
Like I said, I think this is the big reset. For me, 10 years ago, it was the big recession. This is sort of the big reset in sports, and there'll be some pivots coming out of this. There'll be some organizations and cities and communities that win from this. I think there might be some that suffer from it, unfortunately, but I think you're going to see a euphoria of reconvening around sports. That first game, when you think about what happened after 9/11, 10 days, 11 days later, in New York, when George W. Bush threw out the first pitch, things like that, you're going to see this rush back whenever this happens. And I think people are going to literally appreciate being at events as opposed to consistently critiquing events and what's not right about their team, what's not right about the league or the setup or the structure. I think they're going to be super appreciative of just being able to attend something like that. So that may last for a short period of time, but I think you're going to see that sort of euphoria when this does turn and we're able to open our shades and come out, literally.
Two pieces of comedy for you, Marty. First things first, the Orioles were trying to find a way to avoid 100 losses. I think they did. Second thing, our hatred and rivalry with Washington. This virus has once again proven that Washington should have never have won a world championship. It's going to delay their banner being hung.
Right.
If it were the Redskins, we would be celebrating it here. So I'm going to celebrate it thusly in that way, in my own little sort of perverse way. So there you go. Let them all talk about me in Washington. They can't come and get me now anyway, so everything's sequestered. Hey, man, take care of yourself, right? Let's stay in touch and keep your sense of humor, okay? Keep the Springsteen channel on.
Yeah.
If you find a really good reading of The River, I recommend The Night in St. Louis. It's up on YouTube. You can go watch that. He talks about falling in love with Patty under the Gateway Arch on the River Tour a couple of years ago. So go enjoy that. Turn it up a little bit, and, we'll all get through this together. The land of hope and dreams, right?
Absolutely, and I think I'm hopeful that by the end of the year he comes back on tour and he becomes sort of the great convener. He has a great way of, after 9/11, after some of these big
He's going to have an album. There's a Rising Part 2 coming up in this, right?
I think you're right. Yep, so take care of yourself. Be good, and hopefully everybody's going to see each other again soon.
Wash your hands, Marty, all right? Take care. All right, there he goes, Marty Conway, our friend with great wisdom, great advice, and great knowledge. That's what we do around here. We're trying to be smarter. We're going to move above and beyond sports. We're going to continue to talk about ways to make Baltimore better. We're going to have friends on. We're going to have sponsors on. We're going to have people in my life affected, people that have helped feed our family, Royal Farms, Liberty Pure, Pizza John's, Strategic Factor, friends at Buy a Toyota, our friends at Planet Fitness who had to shut their gyms, and the Brick family who had to move the JW Brick 5K. We got a lot of people hurting here, all right? So stay tuned. Hold on to the rails. We're all in it together. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore stuff and sports and news and information and wisdom.